Sahana vavatu, sahano bhunaktu, sahaviryang karawavahe, tejasvina vadhitamastu, ma vidvishavahe. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.
Could I ask something about the last section?
Yeah.
You can use the dream state to get knowledge, right?
Yeah.
And so you dream about what's in your causal body.
The causal body makes you dream the way that you're dreaming. Yeah. So the contents of the dream reflect the conditioning of the causal body. Where is the conditioning of the causal body formed, and how is it formed? Through your repetitive habits in the waking state.
I was wondering, you can also dream from your former life when you have ayahuasca, for example. I don't know, but then people say that sometimes you go back to your former lives.
Obviously, there's a suppression mechanism to prevent us from remembering the past lives. However, through hypnotherapy, past life regression, for example, it is a possibility for remembering certain, figures or certain symbolism. And then the person says, well, where does this symbolism come from, right? So sometimes what happens is the person is unable to help themselves with psychology. So they go to a past life hypnotherapist. So what happens is then the person tries to understand, where is this behavior coming from? I do not understand my fear of water. And then the hypnotherapist goes through a process and they say, well, in the past life, there was an event which you spoke out while you were in a state of hypnotherapy, and you mentioned that you drowned. So now that fear has inherently become an impression in that causal body, whereby now you feel afraid of going inside the water, or you just retract whenever there is an opportunity to go to like a water park or something. So yes, there is a possibility. Also, substances like ayahuasca can have that ability because, as I said last week, the weight of the Annamaya kosha of the body is suppressed. Therefore, it's much easier to access historical record. We demonstrated last week that the 3 states of human experience are also an object of knowledge. For example, deep sleep showed us that there is a presence of the knower, the kshetrajna, even in the absence of the koshas. So in other words, we don't need our koshas to exist because deep sleep proves it. If you knew that you will go out of existence in deep sleep, nobody would go to deep sleep because they would be afraid of going out of existence. But you know that you will come back, which implies what? There's a certain underlying knowledge that you do not go out of existence during deep sleep, which implies what? You are there very much during deep sleep, even though the 4 koshas are totally suppressed. In other words, I don't need this person called Andre to exist. Also, we, through the analysis of deep sleep, can recognize that we all look forward to deep sleep. So what does this show? It shows that there is a certain knowledge that deep sleep is blissful. See, if you knew that sleep was painful, that alone would make us not want to go to sleep. So just the fact that we look forward to sleep implies there must be a knowledge whereby in the presence of it, in the presence of I, whatever that experience is of deep sleep is blissful, because nobody wants to have a painful moment, a painful event. So just the fact that we look forward to implies there must be knowledge that sleep is indeed pleasant. And then we have the waking state. Now in the waking state, we generally consider only 16 hours, however long you're awake, right? Only 16 hours to be real. This is the general condition of the entire world at all times. We say this waking state is real. Why do we say that? Because in this waking state, it is the most stable. Like everything's present and you can work with it. Only on the basis of things being stable, whereby you and I are able to think in this state, only on the basis of that, we say this state is thus most real. But what are you saying? You're saying only 16 hours of the 24 hours is real. So in other words, if you spend most of your time in the dream state, right? And then you kind of come into this, into this waking state for maybe an hour or two, and you go, the waking state is like a dream. Let me go back into my dream state. In other words, only on the basis of spending most of our times in the waking state, only on the basis of that, we call it the most real. But is it the most real? You can't call it absolutely real, because what about those other states? You cannot call 16 hours of the 24 hours real. So what are we showing through this 3-state analysis stacked next to each other, in whose presence I, the knower, get to shine upon them, and therefore get to speak about them through this instrument of the 5 koshas. We're not necessarily analyzing what's within each state, even though that is also a subject of itself. Rather, we are showing that in order to distinctly identify 1, 2, 3, what does that imply?
The true self is present throughout all states.
In other words,
it pervades all states.
Good. In other words, by the very fact that no one can deny of the 3 states, it implies there is a 4th principle called turiyam. A 4th principle which is free of all 3 states. In other words, you can only validate all 3 if there is a 4th. And what is that 4th? I am, kshetrajna, the knower. And this in the Chandogya Upanishad, they call it the turiyam. It just means 4th. To know 3, I have to be other than the 3. It's just pure logic.
Question, you talked about turiya, and you said that this is the 4th, it's the principle which is beyond these 3 states. So what is the difference between turiya and deep sleep?
A deep sleep is just a state. It's like, imagine like 3 states stacked together. So what's the difference between turiyam and 3 states? Turiyam is the 4th. That means that which is independent of the 3. Because it is independent, not conditioned by the 3, it is thus able to validate the existence of the 3 states. And what is it that validates the existence? I do the kshetrajna. Kshetrajnam chapi mam vidhi sarva kshetreshu bharata kshetrajnayor jnanam yattajnanam matam mama.
Bharata, Arjuna, may you know me as the knower of the body and all the bodies. That which is knowledge of the body and of the knower of the body is truly the knowledge. This is my vision.
Okay.
Here, indeed, is what the Shastra has to reveal. May you know me, Ishvara, as the Kshetranya in all the Kshetras. That Kshetranya who knows the Kshetra, the physical body, mind, sense complex, is to be understood by you as me, Parameshvara. This is the sense in which Krishna uses the first sense singular here. Who is that Parameshvara? Shankara says, the one who is not subject is samsara. Everyone understands the Kshetranya to be samsaran, but here he says the Kshetranya is identical with Ishvara, the Lord. And the Lord is not just the Kshetranya in one given body, but in all. Sarva Kshetrastu. Wherever one says, this is my body, there is this Kshetranya, the Chaitanya that obtains in every body. That Bhagavan says, in me, Sarva Kshetru, in all the bodies, I am the Kshetranya. In other words, he is saying, you are me. Every person is me, Parameshvara. This Kshetranya, Shankara explains, is seemingly divided into countless forms, beginning from Brahmaji to a blade of grass.
The first point that Krishna is saying is, know me as the Kshetrajna in all the Kshetras. That means know me as the content in every single form in the entire universe. And the second point that he's saying is the knowledge of Kshetra and Kshetrajna, the knower and the known, is true knowledge. So let's start with know me as the Kshetrajna in all the Kshetras. We have to now bring this more to a relatable level. And to do this, I thought I would take chapter 6 from Chandogya Upanishad, which is one of my favorite chapters. It is a conversation between Udalaka, the father, and Shvetaketu. And Shvetaketu, he was a little bit late to go to the school, but after he finished his 12-year program, he was brilliant, right? He was one of those top students. And he comes home, right? His father, Shvetaketu, notices, you got a little bit of pride there, right? Because he's now, it's all 4 Vedas, right? He mastered all 4 Vedas, even the Upanishads. So he's full of knowledge. And father, the wise father, He notices my son is arrogant, but also he's full of knowledge. He has two options. Either he can scold him and he can say, what's all this ego? But he doesn't do that. Instead, he chooses option B and he says, did your teacher show you that knowledge, knowing which the unheard becomes the heard, the unknown becomes the known, the unseen becomes the seen? Has your teacher shown you that knowledge, my son? I know you know the 4 Vedas and you can recite them by heart, but what about that knowledge? And then what does Shvetaketu say? This is impossible. He's shocked, right? How is this possible? What are you talking about, father? So why does the son respond like this? Because the son's rationale is, if I know one thing, then I don't know another. If I know biology, I don't know science. But not only that, if I do know biology and I'm very good at it, then how much do I really know? Because there's always more to know. The more you discover how much there is more to discover. Science would say, when we discover one thing, we actually also discover another thing. And what is that? We discover how much there is more to discover about what we just discovered, right? So the list keeps on building on and on and on. In other words, no matter how much you look, that only opens up a new list of things to look. And now Father is saying, has your teacher shown you that knowledge? Knowing which, once known, everything at once becomes known. Even the unknown becomes the known. So the son says, there's no such knowledge, right? This is the first conclusion that we all make, because we only use 2 means of knowledge. One, pratyaksha, second, anumana. Pratyaksha is perception. Second is inference. If we only use these 2 means of knowledge, then we're going to say there is no such knowledge, impossible. Because you can only know what you perceive, right? If I perceive science or biology, that's what I know. That means your entire reality stops at perception and inference. But the second thing that the son says is there such knowledge? And what is that knowledge? So this is good, curiosity. Also, what happens is an important transition between father and son to teacher and student. Because the father asked the question and now the son wants to know. So immediately that relationship changes from father to son to teacher, student. Same thing happens with Krishna and Arjuna. In fact, they knew each other since childhood, Krishna and Arjuna. But what did Arjuna ask Krishna? For mundane things. So even though Krishna was there in front of Arjuna, able to provide the highest knowledge in the universe, Arjuna simply did not request it. Why? Because he found no value in such topics. Because his life is brilliant. He's an orator, he's got his palace, he's got his family, everything's fine. So as long as things are fine, then even if the teacher is right in front of you, you're simply going to reject this because there's no value in this knowledge. This is why it's not so simple. It's not a matter of here's the teacher. That's why they say the teacher comes or teacher shows up when the student is ready. It's not like the teacher goes, oh, let me, kind of tuning who's looking for me. The teacher was always there waiting. And there's a lot of them, but we just don't recognize them because our value for such knowledge is not activated yet because everything's fine. You got to work, you got family, you're happy, you got a good job, everything's going on fine. There's no reason to search for more than that. So this means there is an aspect of how this knowledge starts. Now let me look deeper into things. I'm not satisfied with the way that I am. And that's when this knowledge starts to come into one's life. Usually, not always, because some people just from their own sense of sophistication, they go and search for this knowledge. So then father says, yes, son, there is such knowledge that I speak of. And how does the father demonstrate this? He demonstrates with 3 examples. The first one is clay pot. The second is with a gold ornament. And the third one is with a nail cutter. Now I'm going to use the clay pot example because I think it's a brilliant visual example. And I'm not teaching chapter 6 in this session, so I'm only going to stick to the clay pot example. So what is this?
It's a clay pot.
If I say this is a pot, right? That is a noun. And what is clay? Clay is an adjective. So traditionally, you can have a noun without an adjective. So if I, for example, say this pen, it's a long pen. Now, if I take a word long away, right? If I take the adjective away, I still have a pen. It's a beautiful pen. I don't need the word beautiful, long, short, right? Non-working, working. All of that does not affect the noun, the pen. But in this case, if I take away the adjective, the clay, can you still have the pot? No. Because what is this pot made out of? It's made out of the clay. So the pot is the noun, the adjective is the clay. If I take out the adjective, then I cannot have the pot because the entire pot depends on the content from which it is made of, that is the clay. So this object called a pot enjoys what's called a satya mithya relationship. So what does that mean? Satya means independent and mithya means dependent. In other words, what depends on what? This pot depends on the clay. So the pot is mithya because it is dependent upon something for its existence, and the clay is satyam because it is independent. So therefore, this object enjoys what's called a satya mithya relationship. Before this pot comes, the clay is there. While the pot remains, the clay still remains. When this pot breaks, the clay still remains. In all conditions, if I break this right now into 1,000 pieces, what has broken? This form has broken. But has the clay broken? Absolutely not. In other words, the clay remains the same in and through whatever condition or form, size, shape, function this object happens to enjoy. So this is what I'm holding, what I'm putting across. So now the question is, where is the clay here? Where specifically is the clay?
Everywhere.
Yeah, it's omnipresent. Yeah.
The clay is everywhere. It is all over the place. Right? There's no place where the clay is not. So while the clay is everywhere throughout the pot, at the same time, this clay remains intrinsically free from the attributes of this pot. So if this pot is big, right? It's huge. That hugeness belongs to what? The pot itself. If this pot is tiny, then that tiny belongs to the pot itself. It does not belong to the clay because the clay is just the content from which this entire object is made of. So no matter what features or size, shape this pot enjoys, that does not belong to the clay itself. Because if it did, then you cannot have another pot, right? In other words, the clay always remains free of whatever the shape happens to be undergoing. Whatever modification the noun, the shape enjoys, that modification only belongs to the form itself. It does not belong to the clay. Okay, so you say that the clay is everywhere. So this is what we call satya mithya relationship. Wherever there is form called mithya, that's exactly where satyam is. That's exactly where there is clay. You said it yourself. I asked the question, where is this clay? You said everywhere. So now suppose this pot, jiva, starts to look inside to find itself, to find the clay. Is it ever going to find it? It already is the clay. Does this now mean that this pot has to transcend itself to find the clay? No, because it is already the clay. Does this mean now that this pot has to go into meditation, into a really deep samadhi and attain the clay? No. In other words, no matter what this pot does, it is never away from what it already is. It is already enjoying the very content from which it is made of and which allows it to modify itself, called self-transformation, by the way, into different forms. One moment it's an adult pot, next moment it is a child. Well, it's actually a child pot and then it's an adult pot, right? Some of us go backwards, doesn't matter. Either way, it's still enjoying that one same reality.
I guess it only becomes more evident about the clay once you drop it and destroy the pot.
Where is the point of beginningless confusion now? The point of beginningless confusion is when we take this empirical world of pots, called potware. And then we attribute that as the final reality. So for example, suppose there's a world of pots, right? 2 pots now, and then you bring 3 pots, right? And now the scientists go and look, okay, so this is, we found the smallest quark, we found the smallest subatomic particle. So where is the point of beginningless confusion? That is when you look at the form called the empirical reality. What is empirical reality? The reality which we all universally agree upon. If you look at a sun, we're all going to say it's a sun. No one's going to call it an elephant or something, unless I think there's a schizophrenia. Those people will probably project a personal notion onto the substratum. So if the substratum is the pot, then they will project, for example, some memory onto that pot. In other words, you still need a substratum to project things onto that. Just like, for example, if you tell a lie is only on the basis of what? The truth. In other words, the person cannot lie unless they are referring to some truth. So in that same way, a person cannot project unless their own ideas, unless they are already provided with a substratum called the form. So where is the point of beginningless confusion? It is whereby we see this world of pots. Suppose, one pot is now looking at another pot and goes, okay, you are absolutely real. And then all of the behaviors start to reflect that reality. In other words, because you are the final reality pot, I'm now going to, spend my whole life, and we're just going to mingle together, and then we're going to explore the world of more pots. And then, another life comes up, okay, more pot babies come, let's have a little pot family, right? So the beginningless confusion comes where we stop at the actual form and we don't look deeper into it and recognize that it is only the clay itself. So this is still at the level of the pot world that I'm describing. I will now transfer it into us later on. Okay, so let's summarize. The clay is satyam, right? It is the independent reality, and it is free from the pot. The pot is mithya. Why is pot the mithya? Because it is a dependent reality. And while appearing as the pot, the clay remains intrinsically free of the attributes that belong to the pot. Again, the pot does not need to transcend itself. The pot does not need to go within and find itself. The pot doesn't need to have some drugs in order to kind of like be more sensitive and discover itself. It is never not enjoying what it already is right now. That's the first thing that this pot can recognize. In other words, what are we showing? We're showing that there is only clay appearing as pot. There is big clay, there is big pot, small pot, right? There is a sometimes adharmic pot, and there is a dharmic pot, right? But what is that? Does that still define the clay? Suppose you got an adharmic pot, right? A pot that is kind of, still yet to learn about principles of morality and righteousness. Does that itself define the clay? Absolutely not. In other words, the clay remains free of what attributes belong to the pot itself. So now the question is, why do we have two names? Why do we have like pot, clay pot and clay fork? The reason is so that we can distinguish between each other. So for example, suppose, the pot says to the other pot, I want to eat some pot. I want to eat some clay. And then, I want to kind of, let's go explore the clay world. Let me lie on the clay, that is bad, right? Let me, kiss clay. Let me kind of, drive clay. You cannot function in this world if you call everything one content. So therefore, why do we have so many names? And this is where the confusion comes, by the way. It's like, what are all these names? Like Sanskrit names and, like 10,000 names from different traditions and schools. Why so many names? Because the names themselves are all just belonging to that tradition, but every name ultimately resolves into the one truth, which pervades every single name itself. And that truth cannot be negated, because if you negate the clay, what are you negating? You're negating the entire universe made out of clay. Suppose that the living pots are now burnt, right? Suppose that in the past, all of those wise pots that lived, they're now burnt and there's no more wise pots. Does that affect the truth of the clay? Not at all. In other words, even if you don't know all forms, and you will never know all forms, by the way, impossible to know all forms in the entire universe. Even if you don't know all forms, it still doesn't affect the truth of the clay. If I know all forms, or if I know some forms, it still doesn't affect the truth of the clay. If I know only a little bit of forms, it still doesn't affect the truth of the clay. In other words, no matter how smart you are or non-smart, the clay remains independent because the truth is in and through everything, every form. If this form is bound to know only so much, then it still doesn't affect the truth of the clay. If this little pot is only bound to so much knowledge, it still doesn't affect the truth of the one clay. In other words, what is the only principle that both of these pots can know? They can only know the truth which is in and through both of them. So knowing that, I at once come to know the entire universe of potware, because the entire universe is made out of just clay. At once, by knowing the clay, I come to know the unknown, because what is the unknown? It is also in potential. Potential is also clay. At once, I become to know the unheard, because what is unheard? It is also made out of clay. At once, I also see the unseen. Why? Because whatever unseen, whatever is yet to manifest, it is going to be nothing but clay. The entire world of knowns and unknowns is nothing but the one content pervading them, and that is what we call the final reality, the truth. So this means I don't have to now go into the details. How much you're going to be successful at that? The more you find, the more you're going to discover how much there is more to know. But if I discover that one truth, then I come to know the entire universe at once.
Say, for example, the pot in your hand realizes that everything is made of clay. So now it's got the true knowledge, but it still doesn't know that the other pot is a leaky pot. So it doesn't know about the other kshetram.
Okay, so it doesn't know about, but what is the content of the other kshetrams?
Yeah, it realizes that everything is made of clay.
Yeah.
So it realizes that that's the true knowledge, but that doesn't give it the knowledge of all kshetrams.
Yeah, good. So what Shiva is saying, it doesn't mean now, I know, I can read your mind, pot, I know everything what's going on. It doesn't mean that. It just means whether I know about you or not, you're still the one content appearing as a different form. But that form does not contradict what I know. And what I know is the one final reality.
Yeah.
In other words, by knowing the one final reality, you're not now tempted to go and explore 10,000 different other forms. Because, no matter what you find in the past, present, or future, you're only ever going to find the one content which you already are right now.
Yeah, the leaky pot is just the characteristics, and different pots leak in different ways with different characteristics. That's it.
So let's ask now, what is the reality of a pot that is yet to become wise? Right? We'll call it the small pot. So we'll call this a jiva pot. This jiva pot, what is it going to do? It's going to spend its entire life manipulating itself, the form, but also manipulating the world of forms, the world of other pots. Why? Because the final reality for itself is what? The pot itself. So what does the jiva that is yet to discover this knowledge, what is that life like? Everything I do, says the little pot, is for the sake of manipulating myself, making myself bigger, smarter, right, more intelligent, and also manipulating the other world, the world around me, for the sake of satisfying my little existence here. This is the experience of a pot that is yet to recognize the nature of itself. Now, what about the Jivan Muktaha pot, the pot that has ascertained this knowledge? What does this pot recognize? It understands, number one, I'm the clay. Just like last week I said, I'm consciousness. I'm clay. I pervade this entire world of forms. At the same time, while pervading this entire world of forms, I never undergo any change in becoming this world of form. While this world of forms is present, I remain constant. I always remain the clay itself. In other words, even if I appear an undesirable pot, right, a pot that is not so sharp or it's kind of blunt, or even though that's not really the case in Vedanta because most students are tuned in. So whatever this pot appears like or has its function, whether it is a small function in this world or whether it is a big function in this world, it is still pervaded by the one content, which is also the content of everything else in this world. While I appear as various forms, says the wise pot, while I appear as all forms in this universe around me, I intrinsically don't become any of them. The person that this pot was at some point in the past as a little child does not affect the clay. The adulthood that this pot enjoys does not affect the clay. The old age that this pot enjoys or doesn't enjoy doesn't affect the clay. When this pot one day breaks, death, it doesn't affect the clay. Only changes what? The form itself. And where is the form going to go? Nowhere else but into the very same clay that it already is, because there is an entire world made of just one clay. In other words, no matter what this pot does throughout its life, it will never get away from itself. It is only ever speaking to itself. It is only ever doing for itself. It is only ever loving for itself. If it starts talking, putting down other pots, what is it actually putting down? Knowing that everything's made out of the one clay, it's actually putting itself down. Because there's nothing other than just that one existence in and through all pot and ware in this specific example. In other words, there is only I, one self, one existence, which is appearing as infinite amount of different forms in and through the entire spread throughout the entire universe. This is what the Jivan Muktaha pot enjoys, owing to its knowledge, having ascertained this vision. Actually, Dave has sent me a video, which I thought was inspiring. And I'd like to show you this video now of the entire universe, right? What this implies. And we'll see let's take this metaphor now to the entire universe, and we'll see how we interpret the universe now. Okay, so big universe, many things inside the universe, trillions of objects, trillions of forms coming in and out of existence, year after year, for billions of years, all in and through pervaded by the one content. Of course, the question is now going to come, how do you prove this in respect to our entire universe? Because it is easy to, right, to say, knowing one content called clay, I can at once know the entire clay world. Easy. But how do we now transfer this to the verse 2, which Krishna says, know me, the kshetrajna, as the truth in all kshetrams, in the entire universe. And that kshetrajna is you, by the way, because he's saying that, know me as in everyone, including the bodies, including the minds, including the thoughts. In other words, know me as the one content being the truth of everything in this entire universe. So what is the nature of knower, this consciousness principle that Krishna is speaking about? The answer is, it is Sat and Chit. Sat means existence and Chit means awareness. So when I say, what is the truth? What is the nature of Kshetrajna? The answer is Sat Chit. Sat, existence, Chit, awareness. Both of them are the content of all Kshetrams. So what is Kshetram? Form. Like any form that is nameable, whether it is known or unknown. What is the nature of that form? Sat Chit. Existence, it exists, but also there is knowledge of that form. If there was no knowledge of the form, how could you name anything? How could you know about anything? So let's start with Sat. Okay, what is Sat existence? Sat means the one existence from which everything comes. Time, space, and all objects. Can you name anything other than that? Because whatever you're going to name is going to name what? You're going to name it in time and space itself. Now, what is Krishna saying? Since this existence is in and through all kshetrams, all forms, then the question is, how do we demonstrate this? Let's choose a pot. Okay, so now I'm applying this into the entire universe. What does this pot depend on? The clay. Okay. What does the clay depend on? Okay, minerals, right? We'll take silicon, for example, silica. What does silica depend on? Atoms. What does atoms depend on? Particles. What do particles depend on? Quarks. What do quarks depend on? You can go even further, bosons. What does that depend on? Time and space itself. What does time and space itself depend on? Existence. Because how can you have time and space unless it exists? Based on this order that I just said, it is what? Forms within forms within forms. There is, right? There is down the line, there is mithya within mithya within mithya. Because from a standpoint of the clay, what is mithya? The pot is mithya because the pot depends upon the clay. From the standpoint of the silicon, what is mithya? The clay is mithya because it depends on the silicon. From the standpoint of the atom, what is mithya? The silicon is mithya because it depends on the atom. From the standpoint of from the particle, what is mithya? The atom is the mithya because it depends on the subatomic particles, neutrons, protons, etc. From the standpoint of quarks, what is mithya? Subatomic particles because they depend on the quarks. From the standpoint of space and time, what is mithya? Quarks themselves, because you cannot have any form, any shape, unless it is accommodated by time and space itself. You need to put it inside a space in order to observe it. It needs to have a duration in order to see it, in order to infer. In fact, even science will substantiate what Vedanta is saying. It says that all forms are mithya. In other words, all forms are dependent upon something else. What does quantum physics say? It says nothing is as it appears. Actually, this is not new. You can just go to quantum physics and get all of this knowledge. So that's exactly what Vedanta has been saying all along. And now quantum physics comes and simply confirms, I'll get to you, Robert, what we have already observed in the Vedic scriptures. Yes, Robert?
Yeah, there's further evidence for that when you talk about quarks, the smallest particle. they're said to have a virtual existence in the sense that they went in and out of existence. They move from the physical world reality to a virtual world, so a lot of boundary condition that resolves into space-time.
The second observation is the forms keep changing. From the standpoint of clay, is it still a pot? No. From the standpoint of silicon, the minerals, is this still clay? From the standpoint of atoms, is it silicon? No. From the standpoint of subatomic particles, is it atoms? No. In other words, the more you keep going, it is no longer what it was. It is now something else. But what remains true? Isness. In other words, the pot exists. Clay is, the clay exists. Mineral, like silicon, is because the silicon exists. Subatomic particle, atom is because it exists. Particle is because it exists. Quark is because it exists. Space-time is because it exists. So what's changing? The forms, the mithya forms along the line are changing. But what remains there? What is holding every single form? The isness. Without the isness, you cannot have another form to be called that which it is, because you need to say it is. So the existence remains, but the forms keep changing. Therefore, what's the final satyam? What is the final reality? Existence in which time, space, including forms, are. The complexity down the line keeps changing, right? How many atoms do you need to put together to create silicon? Think about the complexity, the intelligence required to put all of these successions together to form the next assembly. The subatomic particles to create the atoms to create the minerals to create the clay. And yet throughout the entire thread, what remains true? Is the existence which they all depend on to have their chance. The particle depends on existence to be called a particle. The atom depends on its existence to be called the atom. Clay depends on its existence to be called the clay. The pot depends on its existence to be called the pot. Therefore, existence is that from which all objects come, are sustained by, and resolve into. But existence itself remains existence. So what's the final reality? Existence itself. And this existence is your true nature, this amness.
So is that a loop? Existence depends on existence?
No, existence is just existence. Existence is just in which everything else appears, but it appears out of existence. It's like the clay is the existence, and everything else appears out of that clay. When it resolves, it goes back into the clay. In fact, it doesn't go back into the clay because it is always the clay. It just changes form. So now, how does the individual become limited if you think about it? We give the absolute reality to this mithya body, to this dependent body. And then what happens? My whole existence becomes limited. Why? Because I stopped at what I see. I use my perception and my inference and I stop there. Therefore, I only get as far as I can see, as far as I can go. So what would Upanishads show you? There is a reality. If you look deeper within each form, you will find a smaller and smaller and smaller until to the point where you can no longer reduce. You can't reduce existence. How can you reduce existence to something smaller? What are you going to reduce existence into? Nothing? Okay, suppose you reduce existence to nothing. Then how are you going to create existence out of nothing? Out of what is existence going to come from? So you can reduce every single form into a smaller form. You can reduce the pot into clay, clay into silicon, silicon into atom, atom into particle, particle into quark, quark into time, space into existence itself. But you cannot reduce existence, because then how are you going to create the universe? It has to come out of something. Okay, now the question is, how out of existence comes so many objects in this universe? Like what you saw that video, right? Nebulas and stars and galaxies, supernovas. How does all of that come out of this one existence, this isness? This isness that is confirmed in just looking at your finger. Finger is, thought is, memory is, emotion is. No matter what you see in this world, perceive, infer, it enjoys a level of, it enjoys existence. So the question is, how out of this existence, we have this entire universe of names and forms and colors and beauty and things that are, three states. How does all of this come out of this existence? This I will talk about in verse 5 and 6, right? So this is not the right verse now, but I will talk about that specifically. And also when we talk about Purusha Prakriti, I will get into this creation as to how all of these things come. Okay, so that was Sat, existence. What was the original question? It was, what is the nature of Kshetrajna? I said Sat Chit, existence, awareness. Okay, so I've covered Sat, let's move on to Chit. Chit means awareness or consciousness. Whenever I say these two words, they are used interchangeably in Vedanta. So whether I say consciousness, I said awareness. If I said awareness, I'm actually said consciousness. They're used interchangeably. So the question is, where is this awareness or consciousness found? It is found right now in my being, in your being. Because if Kshetrajna is everywhere, then I should be able to find it all the time. All the time. Can it be the 5 koshas? No, because you cannot find the 5 koshas all the time. We already discussed this last week. We did an inquiry. 3 states in your dream, there's no physical body. So it cannot be the 5 koshas because they're not there all the time. For example, if one of the 5 koshas undergoes the changes from A to B to C, healthy, not so healthy to mild. Okay, so we got 3 conditions, A, B, C. Then that means that someone has to be present to identify distinctly A, B, C. So what does this mean? I, the Kshetrajna, whose nature is Sat Chit, existence, awareness, can only know about the changes of A, B, C, healthy, not so healthy, mild, right, sharp, not sharp, etc., feeling good, not feeling so good, etc. I can only know about that if I survive every single change. If I survive A, if I survive B, if I survive C, only then can I know about A, B, C. And is your life nothing but knowledge about different changes that are undergoing in your entire life? A, B, C, D, right? Today you feel like this, tomorrow you feel like that. All day long, all life long, in all states, changes. Which means what? Just the mere fact of identifying distinctly the differences in our states, in our emotional moods, in our intelligence, implies there must be a presence which survives every single one of those changes. Otherwise, if it didn't survive A, then by the time you get onto B, you would never recognize that you were A at some point in the past. You would never say, oh, I was depressed, because you would be the new state of B. You would be happy now. But that's not our experience. We say, yesterday I was sad, now I'm happy. Which means what? I survived both the happiness and the sadness in order to tell the story. This means I remain, you remain, Kshetrajna remains intrinsically free of the attributes which happen to be, which the spot happens to be going throughout its day, throughout its life.
Is Chit not Sat? These are 2 separate things?
So the nature of Kshetrajna is Sat Chit, existence, awareness. Okay, so wherever there is existence, there is also awareness. Wherever there is awareness, there is also existence. So let me prove this to you. Can you know, okay, do you exist? Heads shake, you exist. Okay, how do you know that you exist? Because I know that I exist. In other words, I know that I exist because I am aware that I exist. So to be aware is to exist. To exist is to be aware that I exist. So they are non-separate. What's the nature of Kshetrajna? Existence, awareness.
So is awareness could be defined in terms of time, space, and object? Is it a time, space, and object thing, or it is separate from it? Because when we talked about existence, we said everything that is in time, in space, and is an object is existence, right?
Okay, so time, space, and objects is in existence. It depends on existence for it to be.
Is time, space, and object is Kshetram
Yes.
or Kshetragya?
Kshetram.
And is Chit awareness is Kshetram too? Or not?
Awareness is Kshetrajna. So Sat, Chit is Kshetrajna.
Existence surely is just here and now.
Yes, existence always, this is existence right now. This class is existence. Everything exists right now. That is Sat.
So it means existence, Sat is both Kshetragya as well as Kshetram. But Chit, awareness is only Kshetragya, not Kshetram.
Both of them are existence because this pot exists, yeah? But so does the clay exist.
Right.
Right, so both of them exist, absolutely. So all I'm saying is the nature of Kshetrajna is existence knower, but this existence appears as Kshetram. But it doesn't actually, it doesn't negate existence. It doesn't make existence take on the form of this pot.
Correct. And then when I talk about Chit, the awareness, can I say that awareness is Kshetram also? Because I understand Chit is Kshetragya. That part I understand. But can I say awareness also exists, which is Kshetram?
No. Awareness is Kshetrajna. So the nature of existence is awareness. So existence and awareness are not two, they're one. Yes, Lloyd?
Maybe we're trying to say that time and space resolves into existence. Maybe Mina's trying to say that, is there something that resolves into Chit, awareness? But I think it's the same.
Exactly. Good. Excellent, Lloyd. So good. Yeah. So time, So time, space resolves into existence, but it also resolves into awareness because they're one and the same.
Awareness in relationship to time is now, and awareness in relationship to space is here.
So Krishna is saying, I am the content from which every body, mind, jiva is made of. Thought, emotion also. So what is Krishna actually saying? Krishna is Kshetrajna obtaining in Krishna body. Kausi is Kshetrajna obtaining in Kausi body. Shiva is Kshetrajna obtaining in Shiva body. Olga is Kshetrajna obtaining in Olga body. Meena is Kshetrajna obtaining in Meena body. Andre is the same Kshetrajna obtaining in Andre body. Mosquito is Kshetrajna obtaining in mosquito body. There's only one content, one knower obtaining in a different form. So there's no difference between the knower that is illumining Andre's mind and the knower illumining Sonia's mind, and the knower illumining Goknur's mind, and the knower illumining Nagesh's mind. The same knower. So now the question is, how many consciousnesses are there? How many Kshetrajnas are there? The general conclusion is as many bodies is as many consciousnesses. Actually, this is a conclusion that belongs to Sankhya philosophy. They say that there's pockets of awareness, right? And so then Vedanta has to now dispute that in the Brahma Sutras. What Krishna is saying is there is only one Kshetrajna, one content, and the Kshetrams are different and infinite, right? Different forms, different pots, different size, different shape, different function, different role, but one content is in and through all of them. Obtaining and making this form do what it does. In other words, this form's function entirely depends on the content which is pervading it all of the time. Now, objection is going to come up. Someone's going to say, you know, it is easy to appreciate the presence of consciousness in a living being. But what about between two living beings? Right? So if I look at you, I go, wow, you know, there's a conscious person, you know, you're alive, right? You're vibrant, right? Shiny. So suppose I'm now facing you and there's me and there's you, right? Body-wise. Now you say, oh, Andre, you're alive. You know, you're conscious. And I say, okay, Goknur, you're alive. You're conscious. And we're kind of like both going, yeah, okay. But then in between us, we go, how do we now demonstrate that there is consciousness between us? Because, you know, you just see air, right? Okay, I see air, but how do I demonstrate that air, that in between space is also consciousness?
my understanding is logically we can conclude consciousness is not product of the brain actually, because brain particles are localized, but consciousness is non-local.
Consciousness is non-local, correct?
Non-local.
Yeah.
So the moment it is non-local and it's not product of the brain, so even if I'm moving left and right to any direction, I can still feel. So, and there is no muscle that is moving it, right?
Yeah.
So that consciousness has to be everywhere. Like I am moving my brain, I'm not moving the consciousness essentially.
Yeah,
so
good.
Though I am still able to do it. So that means consciousness has to be there. There is no other explanation for that, because I can still think when I'm on moon also.
Good.
Right?
Okay. Yeah, good. Excellent.
Yeah. That was
okay, good. So actually what I want to do is I want to give a metaphor to help us see, to prove that consciousness is also between us, between two human beings. I will do this next week. So far, what did we discuss? We've used the clay pot example from Chandogya Upanishad, chapter 6, to demonstrate the content which is in and through everything. We have used this in reference to the individual. We have not proven certain things yet. For example, how out of this kshetrajna, whose nature is sat chit, that is existence awareness, how out of that existence awareness do you create this entire universe that is intelligence of itself, with laws and orders operating it through it? We have to answer, how do you demonstrate that consciousness is between everywhere, not just in a human being? That's easy. Also, we have to introduce the word, this Atma. Where does Atma fit in all of this?
What's the difference between Pratyaksha Anubhuti and Aparoksha Anubhuti? That's my...
Pratyaksha Anubhuti?
And Aparoksha Anubhuti.
Yeah, Pratyaksha Anubhuti is experience gained through perception of form, through one of your five senses.
Okay.
Aparoksha Anubhuti is direct experience of myself as self-evident existence. I am. Who's validating this object? Is this object validating you, or are you validating this object?
I am validating that object.
Okay, so the validator is the aparoksha jnanam. Who validates space and time? Does space and time validate me, the knower, or do I validate space and time?
I validate the space and time.
In fact, even in dream, what we're going to say? We're going to say the time and space in dream is different than in the waking state. So in the presence of I'm able to distinctly identify the difference between the time and space in the waking state and the time and space in the dream state. In the presence of the kshetrajna, both time and space get validated in my presence.
My biggest question, still not yet resolved, big time, is the source of ignorance. Why there are so many people who are ignorant about this?
Jivas can now inquire into its existence. This pot can say, what am I really made of? What is the truth of myself? And that's when the beginningless ignorance ends. So as long as this pot starts to enjoy other pots, they keep on, making love all night long, all day long, all life long, right? With objects, with the world, then it's simply not going to get the time to inquire into existence. It's too preoccupied with forms because it hasn't learned knowledge which reflects the nature of this clay. And where does this knowledge take place? In the Vijnana Maya Kosha, the intellect. So if this intellect holds knowledge that is out of alignment with the nature of this clay, then it's going to experience suffering. But that suffering does not belong to the clay, it belongs to the form. So what's the form's job? What is the jiva pot's job? To learn knowledge, to get educated about that knowledge, which represents accurately as possible the nature of the reality, which is nature of sat and chit, existence and awareness. So the closer your relative knowledge is to the truth, the freer you are. Sarve bhavantu sukhinaha, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhavet. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.